So, good morning, everyone. I welcome you again on behalf of the conference committee and the Department of Art and Performing Arts of Shiv Nadar University to the second day of this conference. And as many of you were there yesterday, you would have seen a very enriching and a very interesting discussion series of discussions which we had on art research and knowledge production. And today also we are going to continue the discussions and also expand what is artistic research and what is artistic knowledge. And today we have a keynote speaker, Jeebesh Baghchi, with us, and the moderator, Akia Anzi. And I request Akia to take forward the session. Thank you, Akia, for joining.
Thank you very much, Premjish. It's a pleasure to be here today as well. We had a very fruitful and engaging discussions yesterday. Most of the presentations dealt with epistemology of artistic research, beginning with the keynote lecture of Professor Elkins, who outlined several possibilities to think about artistic approach to knowledge. Today, it seems that the focus is more on the social and political role of artistic research and how it may transform institutions, rebel against colonial legacies, expose body regimes, and revolt against rationality in the name of desire. The keynote speaker this morning is Jeebesh Baghchi, an artist, curator, scholar, and a member of RAQS Media Collective. Jeebesh, I believe, needs no further introduction in this form, not only due to the international acclaim of his collective, but since contemporary artistic research in India is deeply informed by RAQS philosophy and practice. But we still have to do it. So with RAQS, Jeebesh Baghchi had co-founded spaces such as Sarai, curated exhibitions such as Yokohama Triennale 2020, Shanghai Biennale 2016, made films, sonicscapes, written essays, worked on long-duration research projects, made exhibition and artworks, edited books such as Sarai Reader series, collaborated with architects, computer programmers, curators, and theater directors. I found a piece of information which is interesting. Jeebesh enjoys the long duration of cooking, conversation, and intoxication. The title of his talk today is Surge of an Image, and it portrays the role of artists as, quote, post-institutional itinerants working at the interstices of the self-organized, the institutional, and sites of patronage, commerce, unquote. I find the term post-institutional rather illuminating, since while admitting that institutional frameworks and forces of the so-called free market are in a sense inescapable, Jeebesh argues that artists may rebel against these structures of power by operating in the spaces between the binary opposition through which they operate. Quote from Jeebesh, to not surrender, to be open to the unforeseen, to observe and absorb, and to learn to be agile between consensus and dissensus, intelligibility and illegibility, peeling and disfigurement, all the while in multiple publics and cultures, is there the artist persistent reality. Over to you, Jeebesh.
Thank you, Akia. Thank you, Atul. Thank you, Premji. Thank you, all the faculty member of SNU, whom I have been part of their jury for 2 years, and I've learned a lot about how the MFA education in India is kind of shaping up and the kind of ambitions, desire, beliefs by which students are engaging with it and coming out of it. Yesterday was very interesting because today I'm talking about surge. I realized it is not just a surge, it is siege of an image. There is a siege to the idea of the artistic image. The who is the artist is under deep turmoil, from bureaucratic opacity towards defense of opacity, like Akia made, a certain degree of unintelligibility, which is important to retain in order to practice, in order to unfold over a period of time. So this is something that I will hopefully be able to take through. One caveat is that these are notes, and I hope the keys you all will be able to find and work out, because the keynote has these two parts. So let me, these are all notes by which I will have made sense of. Most of these are practices that I have been associated with, observing from the side, sometimes curatorially, sometimes co-artists, and thinking with the artists. And some of this is also observations. So the what I would first start is, and one more thing, Aristotle used to say we are individual intermittently and collective intermittently. So today I'm intermittently individual. So it is not just it's not exactly how RAQS would have said some of these ideas. They would have gone through a much more different drafting. So take it as having Jeebesh from RAQS has said, not RAQS. Like sometimes I get into this situation. RAQS ne ye bola. Achha. So now I start. I would take you to an event in August 2017, where an artist presented a talk, Karthik, his full name is Karthik KG. He presented a talk in FICA, under the auspices of FICA in Vadera, in the ground floor, along with his exhibition. The talk was attended by about 70 to 80 extremely young group of artists from Delhi and surrounding, artists who were from various institutional contexts. Now, Karthik is an engineering graduate who goes on to do an MFA from Ambedkar University, newly instituted MFA in creative expression in 2012. So Karthik is one of the earlier students. And then in this constellation of FICA, INLACS, Goldsmith, he goes to do a research in Goldsmith and comes back. And then he presents this paper along with an exhibition. What was fascinating for me, and I think I was the oldest in that room, was the paper was an intellectual argument to understand two twin histories, one of identification and one of database. It was not what you would call that he had an artistic portfolio and he is giving a written supplement. No, this was an intellectual argument over an hour, where he draws twin histories from late 19th century, the techne that goes into the making of Aadhaar. So what I'm giving this example to stage that a milieu gets set up in Delhi, and I've been observing Delhi for some time now, in the last decade, with certain kind of Delhi and surround, I include SNU part of it, so where a certain kind of thinking around art is activated, where the artist is from various backgrounds. Artist is looking very intently on the things that are surround him, in this case techne, the techne of the intimate techne of the identification card, the biometric technology, the database, which is continuously, and the glitches and the violence and the exclusion and inclusion logic of this database. What surprised me most was that 70 to 80 artists, the young artists, were there, pin drop silence, asking questions, discussing after it. So what this scenario, I think, stages the way our artist image has changed in the last decade. And this has not changed by just artists willing themselves to a change. This has changed with the multiplicities of institutional work, multiplicities of way in which courses have articulated how the artist thinks, the kind of curriculums, the kind of reading rooms, like the FICA reading room. So the idea is, it is not knowledge center or library. It is the idea of the reading room that has come up. So what this intellectual constellation is, what we have to take in mind, is the milieu in which the strong idea, another idea of an artist is emergent. And I can to me, the kind of artist I am, and completely of a new generation of artists that I'm in contact with, they are voracious reader, they're continuously writing, and they are moving between technologies and fields. I will quote one artist. One of the things that I was trying to, over a period of time, try to understand this shifting image of the artist. I will quote Haig Abasian. He's an artist based in Beirut. And we had the chance encounter with him when we were in Beirut in the Ashkal Alwan program as mentors. But what was fascinating that when we invited him for Yokohama, we learned a little bit about his practice. We understood a way he does think through his practice. But there is this beautiful quote which he is asked, how can you describe yourself as an artist? What is it? And this is the book this is the book that came out about artists from Lebanon, Egypt, Palestine, and Syria, where everybody is describing their practice. I found this Haig's description very suitable to launch into this discussion. I am an artist, and I work across several mediums, including a fair bit of drawing, video, sculpture, writing, and also slide lectures and performances. My projects typically unfold over several years with multiple parts and iterations, where the medium is dictated in response to the direction that the research takes. In terms of the content, the topics can be quite varied, but it is the approach to these topics that constitute the backbone of what I do. Often I revisit well-publicized historical and contemporary events, like, for example, a sports match, or the inauguration of an iconic building, an historical turn in music, or a military intervention in a given country, and so forth. I then link to these events other stories or lesser-known narratives, which may or may not be directly connected to the events in question. By making such connections, the work tries to render visible a latent ideological infrastructure and offers an alternate reading of these moments. So this is what I call the post-institutional itinerant artist, whose field of research is very vast, whose methods are continuously very agile, adaptive, shifting. And also there is a long thread of inquiry that is running through their work, that they are continuous. And the amplitude of iteration keeps on shifting as they are moving between text and context. To underline this, I would go to a kind of elaboration of a theme that I call tentatively in RAQS, we call it arena. So we have this idea of the milieu. So the milieu has multiple arenas. Now, arena in contemporary art is very rarely discussed. When it's discussed within, actually sometimes within the Biennale context or within a certain kind of ways, it emerges, but it is rarely discussed within the object-centric discourse of contemporary art. But what I take into this discussion, what I want you to consider is two ideas of arena that I find very productive and need to be put in consideration in thinking about the artist research and how artists are today world emergent. One is by Brahma Prakash. He wrote this book, recently published, on cultural labor. He argues it is looking at performance of folk performances all over Bihar and Andhra and Telangana. It is extremely detailed account of performances, but what is important is that there is an intense desire of the arena. The arena is very central, and the arena is produced by a fusion. It fuses the experience, the locality, the intensities, the performative tradition, the speech, the vocalities, the viscerality of the performer. It fuses into the arena. But that's how arenas are produced. But what is most crucial is that the arenas have to be produced again and again. Arena cannot be, it is just there. It happens in time. It has to be continuously produced again and again. So from this book, I think it will be very, very important argument can be drawn out that this idea of arena is not a static, stable arena. And milieus are there, but arenas are continuously fought for, driven, made, and then argued. And it is a practice. It is the practice of the performer. It is the practice of the people sympathetic or living with the performance. And the second, so here the artist and the non-artist is not immaterial because the arena is a fusion. But the second argument, which is a very fascinating argument, is developed by Santosh, and he teaches in AUD, where in his very moving text, Politics as Pedagogy, he takes on this production of the idea of the naming, which group students from Ambedkar Student Association in Hyderabad Central University does, with great tragic consequence, where death by suicide happened of Rohit Vemula. But they name that square, place, that round space where they are demonstrating Velivada. Now, Velivada is that outside, that contaminated outside. That outside which has many other histories associated with it, which then comes into the portal, in the central portal of a central universities, whose idea of knowledge is that idea of performance of knowledge, of inclusion, is completely broken now. What Santosh draws our attention to is that the Velivada is a constant occurrence. It's a potential move of minoritarian discourse which completely ruptures the production of coherence and a certain kind of moral high ground universalism that is produced in the ideas of knowledge, freedom, and many such. He wrote it for the eFlux, and it is available. So between this fusion of the arena being continuously produced and the Velivada argument, where the minoritarian can come and disturb the coherence of the arena that is stable, that is arguing itself as a stability, as a higher normative presence, always the looming, haunting presence of the Velivada. So this is, I think, could be an important way in which we start thinking the artistic arena, thinking the arenas as oscillating between these two moments which are moments that emerge historically, which emerge within a certain deep social churning, but also the moment that signposts the possible tensions and oscillations that we are all part of. So this I kind of stage this because there is this artistic itineraries and there is this idea of the arena and the milieu, because this is very central to the way I think the arguments of many artists emerges and the practices of many artists emerges, the kind of intensities they are able to bring into their practice. Now, Atul, can you show the first slide? I have this of the Atul. Hello.
I'm here.
Can you show the first slide? The slide.
Yeah, just give me a minute. Yeah, it's
okay.
Coming.
So I will now introduce you to a slide, which is a condition report, which is an artifact of art historical research, which is an artifact of restorer. And this is an artifact, it can be a little bigger, Atul, so that so people can read it maybe. So this is an artifact in the museum collections. Okay. Now, what is important to understand in this artifact is that it is this is a Woodski volcano condition report of a Woodski volcano. It's in the collection of Museum of the Vienna Academy of Arts, one of the first art school in the world. This is found out, and this is an artifact of the institution. Goes into and if you see the drawing of the artifact, it is taken out of the museum vault by a group of artists called Discursive Ensemble, Discursive Justice Ensemble. It is Lantian Shi, Cabello Matsea, and Michelle Wong. They take it out of the from the archives or from the restorer's archive and start looking at it. To them, this is a seismic field. This is a condition report with tears and scratch and this and that of a painting of a volcano, and this is fairly kind of a report that will, they read it as a seismic report which is connected to infrastructure, assets, risks, and kind of intimating a always possible disturbance that can actually completely rip apart the coherence of this form, this artifact. Why? Because if you look at risk, if you look at infrastructure, the insurance, you realize there's a huge amount of valuation and countervaluation and argumentation are produced on this artifact. So this is not an inert artifact. This is an artifact in movement, in mobility. And to them, they connect it to a whole different history, the history of earth, volcanoes, the history of the various way in which risk and looting of cultures have happened. So what the artists do with this art historical artifact is that they ask a very different set of questions. But this is emerging from a very deep research. Hello? Everybody can hear me?
Yeah,
okay.
yeah.
So it is coming out from the deep question that one is asking of the institution itself. So you need a kind of a person who's dancing out of the institution, taking into the artifact, asking questions of the artifact, and making hopefully very, very interesting reading and possibility of rethinking this condition report. That is the work that we hope to see in the next few weeks. Next, Atul. The next slide. Okay. Now I found this slide. This is a slide of Rohini. This is where I think it becomes important to understand arenas. Can you hear me? I think there's some loop happening.
I can hear.
Okay, so this is so Rohini for about 15 to 20 years have been moving around. She's a kind of an amateur astronomer and moving around with a whole group of amateur astronomers for many years, traveling all over India. She has been to all kinds of sites of astronomy, telescope, and archives. But it is only in the last 10 years that this has found a form of work or form of finding a contemporary expression, an expression of a work in contemporary art. Now, this is quite fascinating because for her to make this transition from that a work that was a part of her obsession, part of her living kind of form, slowly transforms into. So this is a duration of 15, 20 years that is slowly transforming. If you do the next slide, and the next slide, can you do the next slide, Atul?
I'm doing it, yeah.
Next slide.
Can you see?
No, that's got stuck. I think we need the next slide. The next slide is the telescope.
Yeah, I know. I just kind of doing it. Yeah. Can you see it?
No, it got stuck in the. At least for my computer, it got stuck in the.
Yeah, here it's also stuck actually. If I stop sharing and share again. So
Yeah. So what Rohini produces a form. The form is two forms. One is a lecture performance and one is gathering. So what she does is she invites the gathering around the telescope, and I was part of it and I saw it, and it is with an amateur astronomer. We spend about 9 hours trying to see the sky with a telescope in the Sagar Observatory in I think Tijara near Delhi, Alwar district. It's like Delhi and Rajasthan border. So what is fascinating is that for her, the gathering is the artwork, and we cite it was a clear sky. We hoped for a clear sky. We sight the Saturn, and believe me, it was one of the most moving encounter for everyone to see the Saturn. So what she does is that she is pursuing a kind of events, a series of events, celestial events, as a form of gathering to see and think the celestial events. That's the artwork. And this has happened because the arena has shifted to accept this intangibility, this moment of this kind of movement as an artistic pursuit, as an artistic practice. So to accept the kind of intangible, highly ephemeral moment, but extremely memorable for the participant as an art practice. So this is how Rohini is able to transform her way of seeing the celestial event as an artistic moment for public. Now, is this art? Is the question. Now, question is not, for me, the question is not that. Question is, an artist produce a different kind of object, a different kind of encounter with techne to produce a different kind of object to be considered as art, to be considered as. Yesterday I was listening to this talk where Galileo was coming up. Now, in a sense that Galileo's methodological anarchism or methodological disobedience is also the way one recollects this kind of moments. This kind of moments is played out. Atul, are we okay? Because my two or other three things are very slide dependent. हाँ आ गया. You have the link. The link है कल जो भेजा था मुझे. अच्छा WhatsApp में. Okay, so if you go to the next slide there. I'm very sorry. It's got, yeah, this is the moon, not the Saturn. Saturn we couldn't get an image. This is the moon, that celestial event, that object that you see. And that's the art practice keeps on building on that. You can go to the next slide, Premjish. I don't know why it is so sluggish today. Yeah, this is my, Rohini will kill me, but this is my artistic intervention of the dome of the thing with the moon hanging very close. And then the next is next slide. And this is where the event is so central. This event is a celestial event, and her whole thing is the archives, the techne, the enthusiasm, the communities around it. That's where the art practice is taking her. And this is one of the trajectory of the art practice. But what I'm trying to outline here is the arena and the duration. The duration is long. The arena makes possible for the duration to find forms. The artist then moves to find forms of a duration that they are inhabiting for a very, very long time. So next slide, Premjish. Here I'll take another route. Is that this is Asako Awama. Now Asako is for 10 years have been just making food in a studio, Olafur studio. Just her practice is just food and the life around food. And this is a process. She makes jams, all kinds of food. But what is fascinating is that here I would like to draw another concept, which is this perimeter of the self. Is that the next slide? Asako, mother and father kind of separated when Asako was very young, and father kind of withdrew from the world and became locked in his own world, in his own house. And after his death, Asako goes and finds his archive in a huge dump heap. So, and when that archive, she locates a lot of images and diaries, and the diaries are of late 1960s agrarian plains of Sri Lanka. It is about hunger and agrarian life, and with a lot of details about of crops and seeds and plants. And this is a whole diary that she finds, and with an early 80s images of Sri Lanka. Next image. And now for her to make sense of her father, make sense of a father who went silent for 20 years and went away from her life, and her own practice of food and looking at seed, she has to now excavate a history of hunger, of whole idea of biodiversity of life, also of a troubled history of a troubled island. And because this photograph stops in 83, 84, father recedes, Sri Lanka moves into a phase which ends with the genocide. Now, for the perimeter of the self here, the artistic perimeter, the research is very ground when the artistic perimeter is produced. The self, to understand just a father who receded away from her, is to understand an island which is far away from her. And what is more fascinating is that the plants and the things named, she had to find their history in an archive, a plant archive in Holland. So the circuits that an artist has to take to make sense of something so intimate and personal, this perimeter is ever, the edges are not defined, edges are not known. So in this world of, I can, on some level where Agamben says that, experience is dead because routine has taken over, when the idea of experience has to return to an artist, it has to return to the very convoluted and a complex route through a complex perimeter in which the self, to make even sense of the most intimate moments, has to travel a very wide distance and cannot be done over a few works. It needs another few decades, maybe. Next slide. Yeah, so this is, I just wanted to give you a little short. This is a film that she made and which was shown in Yokohama Triennale. Is the scale of these two images of the hand seeing the image and the image of a distance that the image captures. I thought would be a very nice way in which to understand this perimeter of the self and the distance and the intimacy that it has to traverse. Next shot. Okay, now here I go to another way, another different research. This is a research of an artist, Ivana Franke, whom we have also invited to Delhi, and some of you may have seen her work. Is basically for last 15 years, she's trying to understand perception, hallucination, disorder of perceptions, seeing, the very idea of seeing, what the seeing means. It is in the relationship, in a dialogue with neuroscience, in dialogue with consciousness studies. She goes to consciousness study conferences, neuroscience. She does workshops with neuroscientists. But what is the artistic calibration that she brings into it is very interesting. If you go to the next slide and play the video. It's a video. Can you play it? Just play the video. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Now, what she does in all her research, and slowly she has understood that she has to create darkness, because in her research she has understood that what has happened over the last 200 years is a denigration of darkness. Darkness as the site of medieval darkness. Darkness as the site where wrong things happen. So what this has done is that we have completely forgotten that the darkness is something that was a very generative site of thought and of imagination. And drawing from the neuroscience, where there's kind of controlled reality is a controlled hallucination, she proposes that if you withdraw sensory activations and just keep very little sensory forms and take us to darkness, like an immense darkness where you cannot see your arm, and then because our eyes take about 8 to 9 minutes to open and fully dilate to experience the darkness, because in darkness you see. And not only you see an imaginative space. In Brahm Prakash, he makes a very interesting point of a folk culture, is that he talks about an imaginary praxis. a praxis of imagination. And this is where the praxis of imagination becomes a kind of a way in which artists is kind of chasing, is trying to create environments where we can practice that art of imagination and also try to overcome all the ways in which we live that denigration of darkness and try to figure out a new way of approaching this away from the binary of light and darkness and see different levels and different stratas and different degrees and thresholds of perceptual fields that constructs our very idea of consciousness. Next, this is also a research being done over 10 years. Research continuously in dialogue with a lot of people. I have attended a few of these workshops, and it is a kind of is growing, and it is in the interstices between institutions, between spaces of institutions, between laboratories, between different research grants that people gather. It is also in the artist's own studio with her own colleagues. Next one, I just a short wanted to just take this idea of the research. Here, can you play the right hand side? This is everybody can go to your Insta and see Maqsood Mandol. Maqsood we met during FMI in Delhi, 5 million incident. If you can play this, yeah, I made a scroll. So Maqsood is kind of, his work is about fungi, and he creates habitations for fungi for us to enter those habitations. That is the work he did, and some people of you who are in Delhi must have seen it. Now, if you look at Maqsood's Insta, and I always follow it, right? Maqsood is looking at an envelope. There is an envelope of fungi. It is next to you in your house. It will be everywhere. It could, in winters, in your dress, it comes up. So this envelope of fungi is what Maqsood's practice is. Now, Maqsood makes habitations for fungi as his art project, but the research, seeing the world, he sees a world that is enveloped in fungi, and that world, and I think now there is a very, very interesting body of work that is coming out, which is looking at this biosphere and its ways of working, and a lot of serious artistic intervention, and especially I think work like Maqsood's will enter this space because it can create habitations. Like the darkness can be understood through a different habitation. Here, Maqsood is producing a different logic of habitation, not to be scared of fungi, not to push it out, but to enter it, just to observe it, be with it, and give a duration to understand it. So his work becomes work over a month or 2 months. Okay, now this is the set of propositions that I was making about duration, about envelope, about perimeters, and about the event being possible in an arena. Then the next slide. I'll just take a few more minutes to take you through. Okay, now, yesterday there was this discussion about embodiment, and research and embodiment. Now, I want to draw your attention to a different ways in which research works. Now, this is Sajan Mani. Now, Sajan, this is the work that he did Sajan did a work with us when we were in Munich, and I saw this work. Can you play this video so that let the video play and it becomes more generative to see it in action? I don't know why these videos are not playing well. Not playing? Why is it not playing? Yeah. Okay, now he called it capital. Capital. It was a work on capital. Now, what he does in 9 hours, he's basically writing, he's fundamentally writing a word by Poyakali Apachan, a Dalit poet, and he's writing the sentence, which is, "No, not a single letter is seen on my race. So many histories are seen. on so many races, scrutinize each one of them, the whole histories of the world, not a single letter is seen on my race. Now, this is all he's writing, and for 9 hours. And it is writing becoming a delirium, writing becoming an exhaustion. And in that opening of making people sit for 9 hours with this line being written around, what he produces is a certain vibration, a certain amplification to the very idea of what kind of histories of social injustice or what kind of histories should reverberate. Now, this is a critique of left politics and Marxist politics, inability to engage with caste. And in that, he produces a vibration that reaches to many audiences as to underlining long histories of injustice that can be brought into presence now and make us reverberate in very different way as to how we will understand and live the dispositional in this today's world. Now, this is an inhabitation. This is coming from deep research. Now, all his work now on is researching different kind of poetic and linguistic forms by which he developed this counterculture of duration and counterculture of speech. And next one is, this is dilation. This is how the embodiment is a dilation. And the next one, Premjish, this is, you can play it. I think it will be nice to hear him if we can hear. This is Abhishek Hajra. Can we hear?
Good evening, everyone, and a very warm welcome to all of you. My name is Righantu Shekhar Kashtovish, and today evening I will be sharing with you some very inconsequential pebbles. For my day job, I'm employed as a traveling salesman for traditional therapeutics. And sometimes in my spare time, I try to carve out some miniature pebbles.
Okay.
I am fully cognizant of the fact that my pebbles have long been discredited as being belated and being merely self-gratifying, as being merely self-gratifying. Next.
Okay, here basically what Abhishek does is that it's a huge amount of reading and research of the post-colonial literature and anthropological literature, but basically produces an impersonation of a person who is unable to digest the internal inconsistencies of this material. And then that person has a double life, a life of a Poco reader who goes delirious, and a life of a banal, routinized living of selling something. So in this impersonation, what he embodies is a very systematic critique of both scientific rationality and also a certain form of critique of scientific rationality that do not do justice to the conundrum that are produced historically around this. So it's an extreme intense love for science, an intense love for science that is not understood through a critique that dismisses it, but finding another language of critique through impersonation. So this is something. And then the next one, if I want you to just play. So these are like the dilation, impersonation. These are different methods in which artistic research finds intense forms that are actually slowly, these are ephemeral forms. These are forms that cannot be recorded so easily. And this is the third one. I will end here and then I will come back to concluding. This is by Tania L. Khoury. I saw her work with a co-artist, and this is a very fascinating. Can you? Is it playing? I don't know.
Yeah, it is playing.
Yeah. Okay. Now, Tania. Now, what is this? Is we are sitting. We are sitting as in a wedding table, celebrating someone's wedding. Basically, reading a 100-year history of electricity in Beirut. Now, what happens is Tania and Zaid is a historian. Tania is an artist. They are getting married. Electricity goes away, and then electricity goes away, and then they sit and discuss the history of electricity. So you are sitting in that wedding table and going through deep archival work between 5 continents of how the electricity transaction happens between different companies, state, and different players, leading to a crisis in which today Beirut is now mostly in darkness. So this history of colonial and post-colonial state, the history of electricity, history of outrage, history of how the electricity is managed through civil war is narrated. You are reading those archival materials, facsimiles of those archival material, and they are invited you to a party. So it's the kind of a toasting their marriage as you read a counter history of electricity. Now, this is a form that has researched for 4 or 5 years, a deep archival research, but found the form of an archival toast. You know, you're toasting to someone's marriage. And this is, I go to next slide. Okay, so this is the argument. So I come last to the idea that what is this showing? This is showing that artists are itinerant between institutional spaces, between spaces of research, which are also institutionally occupied, and then spaces, arenas by which where they are laying their work down. And that's what I call, with learning from urban studies, with work from friends of at sea and Solomon Benjamin, that idea of the tenural density. So this is not the artists carry with them a propensity to produce a tenural density in the moments of habitations, wherever they find that crux, where the certain oscillation allows them to express a certain degree of their long durée forms, and also an experimental avenue to produce a new journey, a new form. That's the. So here, research is not artist and research. It is not that. Research is the very ground, of the envelope in which the artist is traveling between worlds, asking questions of various artifacts and various phenomenological doubts, and putting it up for an investigation through various forms, the forms partly drawing from art historical understanding, partly drawing from an intense self-inquiry. Okay, and I will just end the last point, because I think this is not all hunky-dory, and I will end the last thing, tenural. Can you show the last slide? Yeah, I want you to all read this. There is a very beautiful journal, Journal of Artistic Research, JAR, and I read it occasionally. And there is a beautiful essay called Artistic Research on Academic Borderlands, and it quotes Lenka, and it quotes this beautiful poem, poem by Gloria Andalzua, which is basically on Mexican border, and basically on language in Mexican border, written in 1987, sorry. And the Mexican border, the language is always unstable. The Mexican border, it is in dialects. It never finds the stability of a language, because dialects with military become language. So it doesn't have a military, because it is playing with militaries of various kinds. So it is in that she writes this beautiful line, and I end here. Wind tugging at my sleeve, feet sinking into the sand. I stand at the edge where earth touches ocean, where the two overlap, a gentle coming together, and other times, and a places a violent clash. So this idea of a gentle coming together in the violent clash is what I think is the oscillation within which artists work today. And this is the oscillation in which we have to understand and research ourselves into this space of contemporary art. And it's a very, very vibrant space of contemporary art. Thank you, and I'm now open to all kinds of inquiries.
Thank you very much, Jeebesh, for a fascinating presentation. When I was reading the abstract, I was thinking immediately about Homi Bhabha, and you ended up with Anzaldúa and thinking at the border. So I'm happy to see that the two edges are coming together. I think also one of the, I think for me, the most important thing about the presentations that it had it let the artist speak. We could see through your eyes, through your analysis, what actually artist research looks like, and in many, many different forms. And I have to add that many of the practices that we saw now were actually facilitated by you and RAQS Media Collective. So this again connects to what I said in the introduction. The stage is open for questions that I think will be posted in the chat box. So please think, reflect, and type your questions, which should focus on artistic research in the chat box. In the meantime, we already have one question of Vijay Shekhon. He is asking, I will rephrase to make it short. So artistic research is something which is accepted, especially the idea of scientific research and artistic research, so the two can come together. But it raises, I'm reading, but it raises some questions on institutions about how they bring necessarily expertise in pedagogy with long-term engagement, and regarding students to develop necessarily depth for understanding and also funding. So in short, how does it work in terms of funding, in terms of pedagogy? What does it mean? How do we carry it forward?
See, this depth question gets me complicated because, you know, if you see the seashore, you walk around the sea, the horizon shifts, you walk, you find things. I think artistic research is fairly on their own. Artists are doing a lot of walking. Yesterday, I think on your presentation, I think Shumantro talked about walking along the seashore and looking at the horizon, looking at the waves, looking at the softness of not leaving imprint, and finding things is something, and also hitting on a story of an accident or the ghost appearing from the sea, everything. So it's a kind of a walk. It's a walk along the seashore. It's endless. It is, when you go to this depth question, it is an institutional question. A diver needs an oxygen, something, you know, where the institution starts legitimizing itself to a kind of a depth question, because they have the techne of the depth. Okay, now, and it comes with a lot of intellectual and institutional resource. That technique of the depth has to be produced, because it needs oxygen cylinder to go inside the ocean. And if you want to really go deep, you need billions of dollars. So the depth question is something that is sometimes is misplaced. I think what we have to learn from artistic research is the form they take to traverse, to move, to ask questions of artifacts and things. And then that lateral movement is what I think, that's why I was saying the arenas have to be understood in this form, oscillation forms of what they disturb, what kind of coherence they break, and what kind of ways then they weak. How the institution absorbs artistic research is a very open question. Europe, it is very different. America, it is not so developed as of now. I think it has been picked up a little bit in Africa and now a little bit in East Asia in interesting ways. East Asia's have very, where the research is primarily artist-led, through studio-led. So it is like in China and Hangzhou, they have a very studio-led research forum. But it is an open question how institutions absorb. If the institutions are artist-led, they will have a different thing. Institution of philosophy of art, primarily philosophy of art, they will completely absorb differently. And I think the discussion will become much broader. It is not just art historical. Secondly, and materials. The materials that artists are studying today, and the materials that they are working today are shifting very fast. And the kind of like after the petroleum kind of making so much material available, like a plexi or everything. So what we have is now a very different set of parameters, and I don't know how the institutions are going to absorb it. Institutions have to be very agile, or they will become in trouble. But I think the MFA level is not the problem. Though my own interaction with MFA student in Hyderabad, when I was invited to be part of a review, was fascinating, because they were very assertive of the question that MFA should tell them something else than BFA. And MFA should be a site for them to research and find their way through some material rather than just work, or just make work. So there was a lot of this debate, and it is happening at the student level. And in Delhi, among the young artists, there is a massive debate of what constitutes art itself. So,
fascinating. Thank you very much. I think what I'm definitely taking from this is the importance of this deconstructionist artistic approach, and then which institution has to negotiate somehow. I think Indro was raising his hand first, then we have Shumantro, and then we have Sonia. Please, Indro. Indro, are you able?
Jeebesh, yes. Can you hear me? Yes.
Yeah. Sure.
Thank you very much for a very elucidating presentation. And it was wonderful to watch these. Some of them I'm familiar with, some of them I'm not. I actually was present for Maqsood's final degree show when he made this habitat where the fungi grow. And here is somebody who's actually talking about duration and building something which eventually transforms, and that is the artwork. Whereas in Rohini's case, in particularly that slide that you have shown, the short film about the observatory and observing Saturn is more about the event, as you quite rightly pointed out. So there are different trajectories. I mean, in some ways, Tanya's work is also an event, whereas Abhishek's is more about impersonation. So there are different methodologies which are adopted by these artists to make the artwork, so to speak, if I may call it that. And it's never in doubt that there is a group of artists, sort of more conceptually oriented artists, for whom this research is very important. I mean, anybody who's seen Shilpa's work in the last Kochi Biennale would know. I mean, 100 poets whose voice have been suppressed. You need to know their names, their personal histories, and that is huge amount of research. So research is never in question. The production of art which is based on research is a very important strand in contemporary art. Although I dare say that sometimes that tends to marginalize the other kind of art. But given that there is space for both these things, and there is no doubt in my mind that this is here to stay. Now, whether we define it as art or something else is besides the point. I think we are past that debate. The point, however, is, and this is just airing my views in the open. I'm not expecting you to give me a definitive answer. You have given an answer of sorts that academia will have to find ways of, or being agile, like Akia has said. Unfortunately, the academies that we have are not quite half as agile as we would like them to be. But that said, there are, as Jeebesh has again pointed out, that there is a churning happening, and a lot of things are happening under the radar. That is what even I was mentioning in my talk, that you don't necessarily have to institute a course or a nomenclature change or a department which deals with these kinds of things. But in the existing departments, if you're open enough, students can do a lot of things, and you can guide them, you can mentor them to the best of your abilities. And of course, you are not an expert in everything. So the idea is to have a sort of an open-ended discourse. And I couldn't agree more about the last point that Jeebesh made, that there has to be a difference between BA education and MA education. But the crisis that we are facing is that everything in the academia has to be packaged as academic research, and the output of an artistic work becomes the question. So that is a problem. That is what I was trying to bring forth to the table yesterday, that if you define artistic research only as a production of a thesis, as a sort of ultimate goal of the academic research, then you are creating a conflict which is unresolvable. And although we artists, the ones who are practicing, who are exposed to the art world, are thinking in a certain way, academia increasingly is thinking in an opposite direction. And there doesn't seem to be, and when I say academia, I'm excluding myself or people like me, because, academic thinking usually is becoming more top down rather than bottom up. And the democratic space that even we were used to in the academia is shrinking, as everybody knows. So it is more run by diktat from the top. In a situation like that, we do have the risk of leaving the artists outside academia to do their experiments, to do their research, if you like, and a lot of it is happening. But the issue that stares us in the face, especially those of us who are in their last legs in the academia, is that what will be the future of the academia? And of course, you cannot answer it. Nobody can. So it is not a question in that sense. It is an observation that I really fear for the future of the academia, which will be either there will be certain areas, certain schools which will have the agility to do that, and the rest of the laggards will be in the back of beyond. And this division that we already have of privileging one kind of art over the other is going to exacerbate and create a lot of artists who will fall in this crack. And that is something that really requires to pondering over, especially in a forum like this, which is a mix of practitioners and practitioners who are also academics and so on. It's very interesting. Yes.
Indro, I'm sorry to interfere because we have a very, very short time. We are already beyond.
Yeah, that's all. I'm done.
Yeah.
Thank you for
So
allowing
so
me
much.
to speak. Yes.
I can only echo your concern, and I would like to add another question to this ones that I'm taking from the chat before asking Jeebesh to answer. What about emotion? Do they hold also deep meaning or not? These are questions that we dealt with yesterday, but it will be very interesting to hear, Jeebesh, what you think about it. The visceral can hold immense meaning too? Question mark. Please, Jeebesh.
Well, see, the work many of the artists' work, if you see, I use the word intimacy, intimate knowledge. There is this whole tacit knowledge, intimate knowledge. I think what some of them achieve is a kind of an intimacy to a form of knowledge that you're not sure what is it to. Now, if you're looking at, say, in Sargent's work, historical injustice of a silence of a narration, is that if you are staying with that for 8 to 9 hours with him, you are already in a space in which your knowledge, the way you will approach something or the way you will approach a certain other histories has already been displaced. So it is actually changing the emotional temperature in your body. It is the emotion, see, emotions, this kind of most of the work, I think sometimes like after seeing Saturn, I could not sleep, and I never understood why Saturn has been so badly looked down in this culture. Shani lag jayega, I know. So in a sense that it changes the temperature, how you are actually emotively connected to the objects and the universe. That's, I think, the work a lot of artists are able to do it with great proficiency and intelligence. And I think sometimes independent of their work, it happens.
Thank you very much, Jeebesh. We have to be very, very quick. So I'm requesting next question to be very, very brief. Shumantro first, then Sonia, please.
There is no question, Jeebesh. It is so fascinating, the way you spoke. I'm not going to make you down by calling it what should be the MFA, what should be the BFA, what should be the policies, because what you have spoke today, if I may use the term as a performative speaking, it created so much emotion about, at least for me, about looking for knowledge, almost reaching to cosmos. For example, personally, I feel more excited to talk to physicists or microbiologists. I get very excited and emotional about the capacity of human brain can reach so far. So I had the same experience with your talk today, and thank you very much. Lots of confusion about what should be MFA should do. Does art college at all to exist? All these questions are there. I'm just uh, reading two lines from Boris Groys, Education by Infection, where he's saying today art education has no definite goal, no method, no particular content that can be taught, no tradition that can be transmitted to a new generation, which is to say, it has too many. Just as art after Duchamp can be anything, so can art education be anything? Lastly, he's saying, ultimately, teaching art means teaching life. Now, it is a
Shumandro, I'm so sorry. I have to stop you. I think this the quotation was brilliant.
We'll talk later, Jeebesh, about it.
Yeah, but before maybe we'll take the question of Sonia, and then
Yeah.
Jeebesh will answer and conclude because we need to take a break before the next session. Sonia?
You are mute.
Yeah, we can't hear you, Sonia.
You have to put your microphone on.
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Hi, okay, very, very lovely to see you, even in low light, Jeebesh, and Akhya and Atul and everyone. So I was a little frustrated because of technology. One couldn't get admitted to this meeting right from the start. So my question is not very much to do with the specifics of Jeebesh's talk, but more a perennial question with regards to artistic research. And I go back to yesterday, something I picked, something which I didn't know, that there are these three kinds: red, blue, and green research, as you know. And ironically, actually, one felt very validated because there was also credence given to this kind of research in the red, blue, green categories, where one could work on interiority, embodiment, whatever, not so much about overtly about the external world, but observing and perhaps researching. Well, the word research, I realized, was applied also to this, the processes that one goes through, exploration of the self. So my question to Jeebesh, it's a kind of a question. I think it's partly asked and answered in what Indra had to say, but I'll try to be more specific. Are there any method, as a curator, Jeebesh, or as people whose practice includes looking at other people's work deeply and engaging with other people's work, how do you find, what are the methods or paradigms or parameters when you look at this particular kind of research, which is to do with interiority, embodiment, exploration of the self, and intimacy?
Yeah, see, there are certain kind of artistic forms and ways of doing things that are very difficult as of now for me to understand,
Yeah.
but I'm fascinated by it. And that fascination, that fascination brings those work in my thinking, in the group thinking. We stay with those work, but is to be able to decode and narrate it will take time, will take a little different route. So this is the forum where artistic research was, the invitation was for me from Atul was to point out the dimensions of artistic research as we see it. One thing that I wanted to lay out was this kind of a diagram where duration or a perimeter or a dilation, these are certain ways in which we have been sensing. And each of these instances does not exhaust the way this artist is working, even does not exhaust the way they are actually developing their work. It is just a signposting as to make this work enter this debate. enter the debate of the artistic research, enter them to in a way that allows for certain kind of traffic of knowledge happens around these practices. And I'm sure many more attempts and many more ways, many of those practices will emerge, and some of the work that you are referring to will definitely become one of the most difficult, intractable space of the artistic research discourse. I think if you look at JAR, Journal of Artistic Research, there is some very fascinating work that is happening there on embodiment, on actually a lot of work on sonic surfaces.
Thank you very much, Jeebesh. Thank you very much, Sonia. Thank you very much, everyone. I know that there are many more questions in the chat and otherwise. I'm apologizing. We have to move to the next for a break and for the next session. I can assure everyone that Jeebesh is known to be one of the most generous personalities in the Indian art world, so I think you can approach him personally and have a chat with him. Sorry, Jeebesh, for suggesting this. But again, thank you so much for very thought-provoking presentation. I think this discussion will go on in next sessions and even after this conference. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Ankara. Thank you, Sanjesh. Thank you, Atul.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. See you everyone next time.